Filming in the middle of an Arctic snowstorm.
Home sweet home.
Traveling to Finland to dig up ancient bodies. Shutting down a power grid. I'm director Richard James, and last year I made my first feature film, Santa Hunters. Here's how we shot our snow-covered, globe-trotting indie feature, all within Australia, with practical and visual effects.
Santa.
I've been lucky enough to make a couple movies with my second in post-production right now, and I've learned a thing or two that I thought might be worth sharing. I'm going to take you through 3 scenes, what we shot practically, and then what we enhanced digitally later on. I knew going into this film that I wanted to capture as much in camera as possible. This is less about the debate between practical and CGI elements or VFX, and more about understanding that at the budget scale we were working with, what we'd be able to capture on camera was always going to look better than what we could pull off with CGI or VFX for around the same cost. Plus, we knew whatever VFX we did have to do would look a lot better if we captured as much in camera as we possibly could. This presented an interesting challenge. How do we capture a character trekking to the North Pole through heavy Arctic snowstorms and keep as much of it in camera as possible? Australia is not exactly known for its snow, and the production budget wasn't going to allow us to travel across the globe. While we did consider taking a small splinter team over to New Zealand, we could never quite line it up for logistical reasons. We found some great spots that would have worked really well, but they all required things like multi-day treks just to get to the location, and that just wasn't going to work with our schedule. So we had to get creative. Australia does actually have regular snowfall. It's only in very specific locations at very specific times of year, but if you know what you're looking for, you can find it. We were lucky enough to find and get permission to film at a small cabin in a snow-capped region of New South Wales. But again, due to logistics and budget, we knew we could only take a couple crew and stay for just a couple days. This meant we had to be very selective about what we chose to take and what we chose to film. Fortunately, we had taken the time to shot list the entire movie and had storyboarded key sequences. This was a really important step for a small indie like this, because we knew we weren't going to have the luxury of time to find it on the day. We'd have to get in, shoot exactly what we needed, and get out. This would turn out to be really important, and I'll explain why in a moment. So having a concrete shot list, and knowing we'd only have 2 days to film, we of course decided to concentrate on what would be hard to pull off digitally. We knew we could digitally expand the backgrounds later in post, and more on that in a bit, but for now we knew the most important thing was getting Chris directly interacting with the cabin and the snow itself. This was going to ground the film with a level of realism to see someone actually in the snow, actually interacting with it. So, with the entire production kit fitting inside my backpack, we flew to New South Wales. This was admittedly a lot of fun. The crew on Santa Hunters wasn't particularly big anyway, ranging from 10 to 15 people on a normal set day. But when it was this small team of just the 3 of us running around in the snow through actual snowstorms to get the shots, I was reminded of how much you can pull off with a camera and a couple of friends. Going back to the shot list, because we had taken the time to so extensively pre-plan exactly what we needed to shoot, we actually managed to get all of that coverage in one day. This gave us an entire additional day to go around and get anything else we could think of. So the following day, Natalie and I went back up the mountain to shoot some additional coverage in wide shots, this time with Natalie wearing the red snowsuit. We honestly weren't sure if this footage was going to cut, simply because Chris and Natalie are 2 very different looking human beings, but through all of the test screenings and now the film being released publicly, no one has ever noticed. This added a lot of great moments to the movie that we wouldn't have otherwise been able to capture. Because we took the time to extensively pre-plan our shot list, even as we adjusted, we knew exactly what we needed. If we had gone up without that, there's no way we would have been able to capture everything so efficiently. Back home, away from the slopes, we began rolling on a number of scenes which feature Chris inside of his tent while he's in the Arctic. For these scenes, we moved production into a soundstage with a white cyc wall. We did this for a couple reasons. We knew there was a scene where Chris was going to rip open the tent and run outside, and so rather than placing a green screen behind him and having to comp it out later, we could instead place an infinite white backdrop that would get us 90% of the way there, and then comp in some additional snow elements later on. But the larger reason had to do more with the quality of light that we would get in this space. We knew from research that getting a soft, diffused, omnidirectional light source would be key to recreating the look of a snowy expanse. We did try some tests in some other locations first, but it never quite looked right. Having this large space with a lot of white surfaces we could bounce light off really helped match the on-location footage. Of course, being on a soundstage, the trade-off we were now making is that, as far as I know, it doesn't snow indoors, so we had to make our own prop snow. This was really important to sell the interaction between Chris and the snow itself, and we used a couple different techniques to pull this off. Our incredible hair and makeup artist added frozen snow to Chris's beard. She also added this very convincing wind burn to his skin, which really helped sell the effect that he'd been out in the cold. We did also suggest that we could just shove Chris in a freezer, but for some reason he was not a fan of that idea. For our prop snow, before production, we experimented with a couple different blends. The one we ended up going with was a mixture of bicarb soda and shaving cream. We had to be careful with this around the camera equipment as bicarb can be corrosive, but other than that, it worked really well. Before each take, we would sprinkle a little on Chris and around the set, and then roll. There are other pre-made mixtures you can buy, and other recipes that you can do at home that use soap, and these all come out quite nice, but they tend to melt back into a soapy, slippery substance, and because we were going to have people running around, we didn't want to use those. When we couldn't get what we needed in camera, either due to budget reasons or practical limitations, that's when VFX took over. For a lot of the on-location footage that we filmed in the snow, there were elements that we needed to remove. A lot of these shots had trees or shrubs that you would never find in an Arctic snowscape, so these had to be composited out. We also digitally expanded a lot of these shots. First, I would source royalty-free images off sites like Unsplash. I built digital matte paintings using Photoshop, then the final image would be composited together inside of DaVinci Resolve's Fusion. Add some camera shake and a slick color grade to make the shot feel cold and desolate, and boom, you've got yourself a completed shot in the North Pole. Rinse and repeat 1,000,000 times, and then you're done. In one sequence, we follow two characters, Eve and Andy, as they travel to Finland on an archaeological dig, and they get a little more than they bargained for. As much as I would have loved to have just actually gone to Finland, this was a tiny movie, so again, we had to get creative. Fortunately, we found this pine tree forest about an hour outside of the city. We got permission to film here and found this spot with dense lush ferns and giant pine trees. Absolutely perfect for the dig site. But there was a catch. Under no circumstances whatsoever were we allowed to dig. Given it's meant to be a dig site, somewhat of a problem. Doubling down on that, due to scheduling conflicts, we weren't going to be able to get both of our actors here, and the one actor we could get, we would only have for a very short period of time. So, how do we make this work? This is where the troubleshooting and problem solving of filmmaking comes in. The location was too perfect to pass up, so we agreed to film there to at least get our exteriors to establish a location. Much like getting the snow in camera, we knew that this location would ground the story in a place, even if we had to capture the rest of it somewhere else. So for that forest location, we shot all of the exteriors of the dig site. The dig site itself had a big tent around it, so we could hide the fact that there wasn't actually any digging into the ground. Then, with the limited time we had with our lead actor Janelle, we filmed her approach to it and an interview to camera. We knew there was a big dialogue scene immediately after this between two actors actually over the dig site, and we'd have to film this somewhere else. So that's exactly what we did. After looking around, we managed to secure another property that would let us excavate the ground to set up our dig site. We set our tent up and it looked great, with the only problem being that this site doesn't look like a finished forest at all. We were able to hide most of it by shooting within the tent walls, so you can't see the very Australian bush behind it, but we knew one of the characters was going to be sitting near the tent entrance. We did briefly consider having both of the actors just inside the tent, but it just felt off having both of them in there with the tent wall behind them. Knowing I was signing myself up for more VFX work, we placed Janelle near the front of the tent. We did initially play around with putting a green screen behind her, but it was cutting too much into the light, and when we moved it back, it wasn't really covering enough of the background, so we just ditched it. So, more rotoscoping for me. For the plate behind Janelle, I took stills from the pine forest location and comped them together to make myself a clean plate. And then again, all within Resolve's Fusion tab, I comped Janelle out using Magic Mask and placed in the background element. Because the original footage was handheld, I tracked the motion of this shot and then used that and offset it slightly with the background plate. This gave a subtle parallax effect which helped sell it a lot. Add the final grade, and hey, you're in Finland. Now, this is far from the best comp work I've ever done. If you're looking for it, you can pretty easily see the masking and feathering in some of the shots. But again, in all of the test screenings leading up to the release of the movie, no one ever noticed. This taught me a valuable lesson. Making the shot technically flawless would change very little about how people felt in the moment. Of course, with more time and resources, we would have spent more time here, but it's worth remembering, people are interested in the characters and the story, not your compositing. And if you're wondering about the skeleton, this happens later in the movie when Eve discovers an ancient burial ground that they believe is the original Santa Claus. The only skeleton we could get our hands on at the time was a cheap set from a Halloween store. When I first saw this, I was really worried it wasn't going to work. It was plastic and obviously fake. But seeing it in the ground with some additional paintwork and that little Santa cap, it was disturbingly effective. And definitely got the biggest reaction from the crew. Like, what kind of Christmas movie are we making? A weird one. We're making a weird one. For one sequence in the movie, we have a gag where the house explodes into a colourful display of Christmas lights.
It's not working.
This was done for one shot in the movie, and we don't really revisit the set or this location, so setting up hundreds and hundreds of Christmas lights for a single gag was just going to be too time intensive. As well as that, we weren't sure that the practical lights we had on set were going to be bright enough anyway, because we wanted it to be big. So, we came up with a plan. First, we set up our shot and locked it off. Then, instead of covering the whole house in lights, I got my gaffer to grab the most powerful aperture light we had on hand and do several light passes on the house from multiple directions and angles. Then, we shot a separate take for performance. Here our lead Andrew acted as if the lights had suddenly exploded on all at once. Then, I got a clean plate of the whole thing. Finally, I filmed some live action elements of Christmas lights against a black backdrop. Using these assets, I was able to pull the light pass into Photoshop and hard bake in the lighting for our Christmas explosion. Back in Fusion, it's just a matter of layering these together. Sprinkle in some additional lighting effects to blend the layers together, and a handheld camera effect. The final touch was having the camera react to the sudden jump in exposure. You can see the way it's been crunched down as if the camera's trying to keep everything within its dynamic range. This really helps sell the effect. It is comically over the top, but I'm really glad we ended up doing this digitally, because if we had done it practically, it just wouldn't have worked the same. But it works really well, and it always gets a laugh in a screening. Santa Hunters has over 200 visual effects shots in the final movie. That's not a lot by modern standards, but for a little indie, it was quite a lot to deal with. There are lots of big splashy moments, sure, but honestly, most of them are really subtle. Sometimes your characters reference ancient stone art of Santa Claus, and then you have to make that. Natalie did the illustrations on paper, and then I comped them together to make it look like they were on stone. Then there's other things like copyright issues for designs, like for example, one of your actors wearing their favorite Christmas sweater, but you're unable to track down where the design came from, who made it, and when, so you have to change it anyway and hope no one notices. And then there's the good old-fashioned art of split screen. Sometimes your actors simply have scheduling conflicts and aren't available at the same time. In those cases, you shoot carefully and comp them together in post. Again, praying that no one ever notices. Making movies is a lot of fun, but it can also involve quite a lot of heartache. It's time-consuming, frustrating, and requires quick thinking on your feet. As a director on movies of any size, people are going to be looking to you for how they should react to problems. If you get frustrated and say, "God damn it, just let me do what I want," you're going to be fighting an uphill battle. The team on Santa Hunters was very small, often between 10 to 15 people on set total. But we were able to pull off a film that feels much bigger than that. Yes, knowing my way around some VFX really helped to judge what was important to get on the day and what we could add later, and I encourage everyone to learn even foundational VFX so that you can do the same. But beyond that, if you go into production with as much of a plan as you can, knowing that some things will go wrong that you can't expect, approaching those problems with a positive, can-do attitude is going to make all the difference. All movies are hard to make. All movies have weird problems to solve, but that doesn't mean you can't find joy in the process either. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this, make sure you subscribe. We've got plenty more on the way, and I'll see you on set.